Right now, open your mouth and look at your tongue. No, seriously, take your phone, turn on the front camera, and stick out your tongue. What you're seeing on its surface is not just a muscle with taste receptors, it's a diagnostic map of your gut. And if there are cracks, white patches, or strange topography on that map that wasn't there before, your body is sending you a distress signal right now. A signal that most doctors don't even check during a regular appointment. Here's what most people don't understand. Your mouth and your gut are not two separate systems. They're one continuous tube, one ecosystem corridor. And the bacteria living on your tongue don't just sit there quietly. They travel. Every time you swallow saliva, and that happens 600 to 2,000 times a day, you're sending approximately 1 billion bacteria into your gut. 1 billion. A study published in the journal Nature in 2022 quantitatively proved for the first time what functional medicine has been saying for decades. Scientists discovered that patients with inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, had bacterial strains in their gut tissue that normally live in only one place: the mouth, not the gut. A bacterium called Fusobacterium nucleatum. Remember that name. In a healthy body, it lives peacefully in the oral cavity and causes no harm. But when the balance of the oral microbiome is disrupted, and we'll talk about why this happens, this bacterium begins to colonize the gut. And there, it does something very specific. It triggers a cascade of inflammatory reactions. It literally switches on genes responsible for chronic inflammation. And here's what's scary. This process can go on for years, quietly, without pain, without obvious symptoms, until one day you get a diagnosis that seemingly came out of nowhere. But it didn't come from nowhere. It came from the surface of your tongue. Let's break down exactly what you need to look for. And I want you to approach this not as mysticism, but as clinical diagnostics. Because this is clinical diagnostics that's thousands of years old, from traditional Chinese medicine to modern microbiome research. Medical name: benign migratory glossitis. It looks like a map with continents and oceans appeared on your tongue. Red, smooth patches surrounded by white or yellowish raised edges. These patches can change shape and location, hence the word migratory. For a long time, it was considered a harmless cosmetic feature, just genetics, nothing to worry about. But a 2019 study in the journal BMC Oral Health found a direct correlation. Patients with geographic tongue had fecal calprotectin levels, a marker of gut inflammation, on average 40% higher than the control group. 40%. That's not statistical error. What's happening? The red patches on the tongue are zones where papillae, those tiny projections on the surface, have been destroyed. This means the mucosal barrier is compromised. And if the barrier is compromised on the tongue, it's highly likely it's compromised lower down the tract too, in the esophagus, in the stomach, in the small intestine. This is a systemic problem of mucosal membranes, and the tongue simply shows it to you first, because it's the only part of the digestive tract you can see without an endoscope. A thin white coating on the tongue in the morning is normal. It's just an accumulation of dead cells, food residue, and bacteria that built up overnight. You brush your teeth, clean your tongue, and it goes away. But if the white coating doesn't go away, if it's thick, if it returns an hour after cleaning, if it's especially dense in the posterior third of the tongue, that part you don't usually see unless you stick your tongue out completely, that's a completely different story. Dense, persistent coating indicates overgrowth of certain microorganisms, primarily Candida, a yeast fungus present in small amounts in everyone. But when there's too much in the oral cavity, it almost certainly means there's too much in the gut too. Because the conditions that allowed it to overgrow here, reduced mucosal immunity, disrupted pH, deficiency of competing bacteria, operate along the entire length of the tract. And Candida overgrowth in the gut is one of the most underestimated triggers of chronic, low-grade inflammation. The fungus damages tight junctions between cells of the intestinal epithelium. It literally loosens the gut wall. And through these microscopic gaps, substances that shouldn't be there start leaking into the bloodstream. Bacterial fragments, undigested proteins, toxins. This is what functional medicine calls increased intestinal permeability syndrome, or, more simply, leaky gut. Fissured tongue, deep grooves on the surface that can reach 6 millimeters in depth, sometimes one central fissure, sometimes a whole network, like parched earth in a desert. Fissures by themselves can be a genetic feature, but here's what's important. A study published in Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics showed that fissured tongue occurs 3 times more often in patients with celiac disease, an autoimmune condition where gluten causes destruction of the small intestinal lining. 3 times more often. And here again, the logic is the same. Fissures on the tongue are a visible manifestation of chronic nutrient deficiency. Iron, zinc, B vitamins, especially B12 and folate. And these deficiencies don't just happen. They occur when the gut cannot properly absorb what you eat, when the mucosa is damaged, when the villi of the small intestine, those microscopic finger-like projections through which nutrients enter the blood, are atrophied. Your tongue isn't cracking because you're not drinking enough water. It's cracking because your gut can't feed your tissues. Now let's break down the mechanism. How exactly bacteria from your tongue get into the gut and begin their destructive work there? Because in a healthy body, this doesn't happen. There are barriers, lines of defense, and to understand why they break down, you need to understand how they work. In a healthy stomach, pH ranges from 1 to 3. This is an incredibly aggressive environment. Most bacteria entering here with saliva die. They simply don't survive at such acidity. But, and this is a huge but, what happens when acidity decreases? Proton pump inhibitors, omeprazole, pantoprazole, esomeprazole. These drugs are taken by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. They raise stomach pH to 4, 5, sometimes 6, and bacteria that used to die in the stomach now pass through it alive. They enter the small intestine, and then the large intestine, and they begin to colonize territory that doesn't belong to them. A meta-analysis in JAMA 2017, proton pump inhibitor use increases the risk of Clostridium difficile intestinal infection by 65%. And besides C. diff, all those oral bacteria we talked about break through the acid barrier. Fusobacterium, Porphyromonas, Klebsiella. 70% of your entire immune system is concentrated in the gut. This isn't a metaphor, it's a literal fact. Gut-associated lymphoid tissue, GALT, represents the body's largest immune organ. Pannate cells produce antimicrobial peptides. Goblet cells produce mucin, a protective mucus layer. But chronic stress, sleep deprivation, a diet high in ultra-processed foods, regular alcohol consumption, all of this systematically weakens these protective mechanisms. Secretory immunoglobulin A production decreases. The mucus layer thins. Barrier function weakens. And oral bacteria that slip through the weakened gastric barrier find themselves in a gut where immune defense is also compromised. Double failure. Double breach of defense. When Fusobacterium nucleatum colonizes the gut, it does something specific. It activates the NF-kappa B signaling pathway. This is one of the main regulators of inflammation in the body. When it's constantly switched on, and this is exactly what happens with chronic colonization, the body enters a state of systemic low-grade chronic inflammation. And this inflammation, it's not pain, it's not fever, it's not the symptoms you'd go to a doctor with. It's elevated levels of interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, C-reactive protein, It's an invisible fire burning at low level, slowly damaging tissues throughout the body, joints, vessels, brain, skin, and it all started with coating on the tongue, with a fissure you considered normal, with a change in topography you didn't notice. In 2020, a group of scientists from Harvard and Kumamoto University in Japan published work that revolutionized understanding of the oral gut microbiome connection. They took saliva from patients with Crohn's disease and transplanted it into germ-free mice, mice that had no microbiome of their own at all. Result: the mice developed gut inflammation from saliva, not from fecal transplant, not from intestinal material, from saliva. Bacteria that lived in a sick person's mouth were capable of independently causing gut inflammation in another organism. This was one of those studies after which it's impossible to continue ignoring the mouth as a diagnostic window into the gut. Second key study, 2021, Journal Cell Host and Microbiome. Scientists performed whole genome sequencing of oral and gut microbiomes in over 1,000 participants and discovered that people with irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, had significantly reduced tongue microbiome diversity. Moreover, the degree of diversity reduction on the tongue correlated with the severity of gut symptoms. The poorer the oral microbiome, the worse the bloating, pain, and bowel dysfunction. And third, a 2023 study from Karolinska Institute in Sweden, they found that a certain pattern of coating on the posterior third of the tongue, dense, yellow-white, persistent, predicted the presence of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth with 78% accuracy. SIBO, a condition that usually requires a hydrogen breath test to diagnose. And here, 78% accuracy from one look at the tongue. 78%. Okay, we've broken down the problem. Now let's talk about what to do about it. And I want to give you not general advice like eat more vegetables, but specific evidence-based steps. Every morning, before eating and before brushing teeth, stick out your tongue and photograph it. Same lighting, same angle. Do this for 30 days straight. You'll be surprised what patterns you start noticing. Changes after certain foods, after stress, after taking antibiotics. You're creating your own personal diagnostic database. Not plastic, copper or stainless steel. Copper has natural antimicrobial properties. 2 to 3 gentle passes from root to tip every morning. This mechanically removes excess biofilm, that coating, and reduces the number of bacteria you swallow during the day. A study in the Journal of Periodontology showed that regular scraper use reduces anaerobic bacteria on the tongue by 75%. But, and this is critically important, don't use antibacterial mouthwashes with chlorhexidine on a daily basis. They kill everything, both pathogenic and beneficial bacteria. It's a nuclear bomb on your oral microbiome. A 2020 study in the journal Free Radical Biology and Medicine showed that even 7 days of chlorhexidine mouthwash use significantly reduces populations of nitrate-reducing bacteria in the mouth. These bacteria that help produce nitric oxide, a molecule critically important for vascular health and maintaining normal blood pressure. You're trying to remove pathogens and end up destroying the defenders. I'm not saying stop taking them. This is a decision you make only with your doctor. But if you've been taking omeprazole for more than 8 weeks without reassessing necessity, and many people take it for years because someone once prescribed it, and they just continue, talk to a gastroenterologist. Ask, do I still need this medication? Are there alternatives? Because every day on a PPI is a day when your gastric barrier is down and oral bacteria freely migrate into the gut. Nitrate-containing vegetables. Beets, spinach, arugula. These foods feed those same nitrate-reducing bacteria in the mouth that produce nitric oxide. Polyphenols from green tea, cocoa, berries. They selectively suppress pathogenic oral bacteria without touching beneficial ones. This isn't an antibiotic. This is precision gardening for your microbiome. Fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir. They supply lactobacilli that compete with pathogens for both oral and gut territory. If your tongue shows alarming signs, don't stop at visual diagnosis. Test fecal calprotectin, a marker of gut inflammation. Test zonulin, a marker of intestinal permeability. Do a hydrogen breath test for SIBO. Ask your doctor to check B12, ferritin, zinc levels, deficiencies that both reflect on the tongue and indicate malabsorption in the gut. The tongue raised the question, the tests will give the answer. Your tongue is a mirror, but not of your soul, of your gut. Every fissure, every patch, every change in texture is a message. And the tragedy is that millions of people receive these messages every day and don't know how to read them. Traditional Chinese medicine has been reading these messages for 3,000 years. Ayurveda, 5,000. And only now is Western science, with its genomic sequencing and randomized controlled trials, arriving at the same conclusions. The mouth and gut are a unified system. What you see on the surface reflects what's happening in the depths. Don't ignore what your body is trying to show you. You don't need to be a doctor to notice your tongue has changed. You just need to look. If this video was useful to you, you know what to do. Subscribe, like, and send this video to that person who's always complaining about bloating and digestive problems, but says everything's fine. Maybe the answer is right there in their mouth.